Jeremy Corbyn, you made a huge advance in the general election, but why do you think Labour lost? Why do you think you didn't get over the line?
Well, we put on 3 million votes, more than any election since the Second World War, and we gained more votes in England than at any time since 1970. The advances were not uniform across the country. We did particularly well in some places, but we did gain seats in a quite wide variety of places, from Scotland right down to the southwest. I think we have moved into a two-party politics position, and the Conservative vote also went up. Ours went up a great deal, nearly 10% increase in our vote. Very proud of that. So we're ready for it whenever it comes again. But the Tories didn't get the majority, did they?
But you were still 64 seats short. You know, the Tories have been in power for 7 years, and you made a huge advance. But why is it you think you didn't quite make it over the line?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that, because if I knew the answer, we'd have made it over the line. All I know is that towards the end of the campaign, particularly when the broadcasting rules were in operation, when there was much fairer coverage of us, we did very well. We also mounted a huge social media operation and a massive doorstep operation, and our membership has continued to rise. So we've got more members than any other party.
So what's your recipe for the next time then? What do you think it is that will lead you to victory? Is it to be more radical, or to dig into the manifesto you put forward in June?
I think essentially our manifesto sets out the parameters of what we're trying to do, which is challenge inequality and injustice. And for the first time in many decades, a political party is putting forward something that does seriously challenge levels of inequality and injustice within our society, and helps to develop the social basis of our society. So it's investment in industries and jobs in all parts of the country, because there's massive regional imbalances. And I think that was one of the factors in the election, as well as, of course, issues of health, education and housing, which we're very keen on. But the point about the election was the sense of community unity that was around our campaign. I mean, you were at some of our events and you could see this huge variety of people that turned up, essentially united around the same thing.
But in terms of how dramatic the changes are that you want to make, how far do you actually want to take the party? Because sometimes you get sort of mixed messages. So for example, yesterday the Shadow Chancellor told the conference that you would take back all PFI contracts into state control. And then this morning the Shadow Health Secretary said, well, maybe there was only a problem with a handful and you'd look to renegotiate some of them. So for our viewers, how dramatic are the changes do you think you want to make?
On the PFI question, fair point. PFI was introduced by John Major, but used very heavily by Tony Blair, particularly when he was Prime Minister, and Gordon Brown, who was Chancellor, of course, then Prime Minister. And PFI contracts are actually a public debt. You and I owe the PFI on the hospitals we use and the schools children go to. They're very expensive, and they reduce the possibilities of a hospital or a school actually running their own building. And so what we do is exchange a PFI debt, which is running at sometimes 15% of capital, for a government bond which will be much less. So actually, taking PFI into public ownership will save a great deal of money.
But my question is about the scale of that. So in your mind, do you want to do that right across all of these contracts, take them all back into public ownership?
I would want to do that. John McDonnell laid that out yesterday. John Ashworth's point is that some of the health PFIs are linked to local government, and in some cases, for example in Northumbria, Arch, which is a council-owned property company, has bought out some PFIs. Now, I've got no problem with that. In fact, I've applauded them for doing so, and indeed I've met them to talk about how they did it. Other councils have done the same. So John is quite right to be slightly cautious on some of the health PFIs.
But just to be really clear, on the scale of that change, you want to see them all back in the public's hands?
I want to see public buildings developed and run by the public and funded by the traditional form of public investment and public borrowing, which is actually cheaper, more secure and more efficient than putting ourselves into a PFI contract. You know, these PFI contracts get bought and sold, and some of them, you know what? They end up in tax havens. Can you believe that?
So the scale of that change is a big one.
Yeah.
In terms of the scale of the change you think you would see right across the country, again, your Shadow Chancellor suggested last night, however unlikely, because of the scale of the changes you might want to make, you might have to prepare for a run on the pound. You might have to prepare for the prospect of people taking money out of this country. Why do you think people might do that?
Do you know what? Now, today, in the Treasury, there's a whole team of incredibly brilliant people looking at speculation against the pound, looking at runs on the pound, looking at the effect on our economy, because clearly exchange rates make a difference. John is making the point that you've got to look at all these things and look at these scenarios. I recall reading a very interesting book by Clive Ponting, who was a civil servant in the 1960s, about the way in which the Wilson government had to deal with speculation against the pound, which was obviously very damaging to the social programs he was trying to introduce. So I think John is right to look at all these scenarios, because if we're going to move into government, we need to know what we're going to do. That's set out in our manifesto, and we're putting a lot more detail into that. That's what this conference is about, and that's what all the policy developments are about. But also look at all the scenarios we might face.
So that's a realistic scenario, that there might be a run on the pound if you win the election?
Well, there's been a run on the pound for the past 2 years, actually. So
is that how you would term what's happened?
There's been effectively a run on the pound. It has obviously made a difference. What it's done is made travel to Europe, or anywhere else for that matter, more expensive. It's made inputs more expensive, but obviously the other side of the coin is it has made some exports a bit cheaper, therefore more market competitive.
But Jeremy Corbyn, that's, your Shadow Chancellor is talking about something rather different. He was suggesting, however unlikely, as he said, that people might want to take money out of Britain if you were elected. Now, why do you think people would do that?
I would hope they would recognise that we want an investment-led economy, that we are going to increase taxation to corporations and the very wealthiest in order to invest in the education of our children, invest in the improvements in our healthcare, and that we'll set up a national investment bank which will actually provide a better basis for industrial developments and investment in the future. It costs on the way there, but the benefits of decent chances of employment all around the country are something well worth working for.
And that message has clearly found appeal with millions of voters. But as a potential Prime Minister, do you worry that that might scare business away? Because that means people's jobs, people's livelihoods. It's not just about big corporations.
No, it's not going to scare people away, because what we're going to have is an investment-led economy that's a productive economy, and we will invest in what is very important, which is particularly skill levels, education and health of our country. Because people living in poverty, people getting ill, are not able to produce as much as those that are well.
John McDonnell also said, you have to be prepared for what happens when or if they come for us. Who are they?
I think they're people that John probably doesn't like. I'm not quite sure who he's referring to there. I haven't actually spoken to him this morning, but I think he's looking back again at the experience of the past Labour governments, that both of the Wilson governments had problems about that, and I just think we need to look at all these scenarios. But listen, we want to lead a government that will reduce inequality, that will invest in the future. And I've met with, and John has many times, the CBI, Federation of Small Businesses, visit a lot of the private sector and talk to them about their investment plans and investment strategies. And you know what, those conversations go in a very positive way, because they want to see a government that's working for economic improvement.
Are you comfortable with him talking like that? You say he's talking about people he doesn't like. He would be your Chancellor. He's your closest political ally. You've worked alongside each other for decades.
Look, John
and he's sounding like you're approaching getting into government like some kind of war where people you don't like might come and attack you. Isn't wanting to lead a country about trying to bring people together?
It is about bringing people together, but it is about changing the terms of the agenda. Because what he also said in his speech, which I know you listened to, was that he wanted our government to be judged by justice, by reductions in inequality, by opportunities for people, by reducing homelessness, by better health care, better standards of social care. He wants us to be judged by the social developments and improvements and real chances we give to people across this country. So those are our benchmarks, and we invest in an economy in order to produce for all. But there are also some very profound issues. He and Rebecca Long-Bailey have both raised the questions of automation, of challenging the gig economy, and I think those issues are going to be quite profound. And there are global corporations like Uber, like Amazon, like Google, that actually make a great deal of money out of incredibly advanced technology. Yeah, well done on the technology, but we should all get the benefits of it.
And there are huge, massive challenges for the country, and you set out a very ambitious agenda.
Yeah.
But to our viewers, would you say that you hope to put forward policies next time that are more dramatic than the 2017 manifesto?
What I said was, and all of the team is saying, is 2017 manifesto was put together as quickly as we could. We weren't expecting the election. I don't suppose you were either. And we put that manifesto together. And it needs... No, it was based on policies we already had. I mean, it was obviously fast. But say rush is a little unfair, if I may say so. But we need to put more detail in it. I've just had a very good discussion with Angela Rayner on how we're going to develop the National Education Service, who we're going to consult, which schools we're going to visit, which colleges we're going to talk to, which preschool facilities, all that sort of thing. So we get that idea together. This is what a National Education Service would look like. But you have
already, in that manifesto, you made lots of big promises, lots of expensive promises. Are you going to keep making bigger, expensive promises? Because a lot of voters have anxiety about how you'd pay for that. And you've already said you would borrow hundreds of billions in order to invest. Should we expect more of that?
I think what you'll see is this conference is setting out the big page, the big picture of the ideas we want, the kind of society we want to live in. And I'll tell you what, it's actually very inspiring, this conference, numbers of people here and the excitement that goes with it is great. But yes, we do need to go into more detail. I think what you'll find next year's conference is going to be a lot of reports coming back on education, on housing, on social care, on health.
Boring, because you've got big ideas.
And those were the basic areas of expenditure we're actually dealing with at the moment.
But you have big, ambitious ideas based on lots of borrowing. Taxpayers already this year have spent £41 billion on debt interest. Now, under your pants, they would pay a lot more on debt interest. We already pay more debt interest than we do spend on schools in England.
Well,
now, you want to add to that bill?
Go back to the points I made about the PFI. Many schools, particularly those that have been rebuilt, and many have been rebuilt, and some have wonderful buildings, great. They're paying through the nose for it. It's like buying a house on a credit card. It's not a sensible way of doing things.
Well, you're talking
that's why
about
we'd actually save
loading
money.
up the country's credit card in order to do the things you want to do, which is perfectly legitimate.
We would borrow.
My question is, should people expect more borrowing?
Mind you, by the way, the Tory government has borrowed more than all the Labour governments put together.
And
what have they got to show for it? All they've got to show for it has been greater inequality and insecurity of employment. We want to change things around.
But do you think that taxpayers should be comfortable with the idea of spending more and more on debt interest, and more this year, for example, that we spend on debt than we do on schools?
I think everybody in the country will recognise that if we want young people to achieve their potential in education, you've got to help them get it. Loading them up with high fees and debts is not the way to do it.
But you would load the country up with debts in order to do that.
Listen, we collectivise what is now an individual debt. Levels of individual debt, and personal debt and household debt are higher than they've ever been. I think we need to look at and rebalance things a bit.
This is your third conference now as leader, and very different environment. Has it changed you?
I'm even busier than I've been, but I've always been a pretty busy person in my life, and it does mean what it changes is that you have less time to spend talking to lots of different people at this year's conference. But the other side of it is I've spent the whole summer, as you know, travelling around the country campaigning, but all of those campaign visits have been preceded or succeeded by very interesting, often quite small discussions with people in community centres, tenants' halls, all kinds of things all around the country, picking up people's ideas. And you know what, I've got some really good ideas that I've learnt from lots of people, because you have to approach life on the basis you can learn from everybody.
And your critics inside the party
are
really, no longer trying to teach you lessons. Your critics inside the party are now behind you because of the advance in the election. Do you feel now you have won the argument inside the Labour Party?
I stood for the election leader, challenging the concepts of austerity and economic injustice and inequality in this country. I was proud to stand and pleased to be elected. Yes, there was a challenge, but that's a year ago. Let's pass that by. And I've put forward an economic strategy. We have put forward an economic strategy which is different. And the party actually, when you were here, you've been at many Labour Party conferences, is pretty united around the basic principles. There's a pretty good feeling and mood around. And you know what? On the 30th, we've got another one of our campaign days. We're going to be out all over the country, events everywhere. That's what we're about.
You've won the argument in the Labour Party.
Well, the argument in the party has been about our role as a party, our role in rejuvenating our economy and our society. And you know what? It's really exciting.